So today's is the first of a series of go-to meetings that we're going to do to talk about things that we really ran out of time for in the users group meeting, and also give people that just couldn't go to the users group meeting an opportunity to check out some stuff. Today we're going to be talking about the MEC, the Manual Entry of Counts UI. And we'll just talk about it in kind of the big picture way first, and then we'll actually dig into the details and show you how it works. Real quickly, all the functionality that I'm going to show you today is in versions 1.03 something something. So if you haven't upgraded to 1.03 something something yet, then you will not have all this functionality. If you're still on 1.02, make sure when you look at the jackalope that it says 1.03 something something at the top, and you should have everything we're talking about today. So let's talk about the original design goals of the MEC, the Manual Entry of Counts. And actually, I'm going to describe it first. I always preface this discussion with this, which is we're not talking about the entry of manual count data. So if you have a turning movement, or if you've got a manual classification count where someone actually is out there on the roadway with a little manual classification board and counting cars manually, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the ability to manually enter data into the system. So data that has not come in with a normal file format like Peak or Diamond or whatever. It's come in on a piece of paper, or maybe someone sent you a spreadsheet or some other non-standard jackalope data format, and you've got to get that data into the system. This is the interface for you. So the original requirements were to get away from the the very difficult way that you entered in this data in Roadrunner, which is a whole bunch of clickings. To enter in a single number required, 10 different clicks. You clicked here and you entered the site, and you clicked there and then a drop down came up with the date. And then you clicked here and you figured out what lane it went to and all that other fun stuff. The idea behind the new Mac, the old Roadrunner version, was to have it more spreadsheet-like, where you can just sort of tab along and enter your data, and without having to really look up from the piece of paper that you're transcribing from. The idea being just to make it as easy as possible for the user just to enter that stuff in. Also, we wanted immediate feedback and QC results, and I'll get into some of the complications of that when we go to the actual demo. But there's at least a couple phases of this. There's instant feedback for, oops, I fumbled fingered, and instead of site 1234, I entered in site bacon. And so that's not a real site in the system, and you immediately get response on that, and also on the data side as well. And we'll talk about some of the tiers of feedback in a little bit. The ability to do it as a batch, you enter all the data in, and it's kind of like a batch in the file submission. Role-based access, so that different people and different agencies can have different views of the same UI. So you might enter in ADTs that some engineering firm gave you, but one of your locals may not have ADTs. They may only have raw ADTs, things that have not been factored at all. And so that agency has different data to input, and so you may have different access based on different roles. And it ended up, we don't call those roles in the Mac, we call them profiles, and I'll talk about that in a bit too. The ability to import electronic files such as a spreadsheet, specifically CSV files are what we can import into MEC. So, if you get a spreadsheet, you can save it as a CSV, and then there's some flexibility with regards to how the columns are named, and I'll show you that in a bit too. The yeah, the generalized design with client-specific customization. I mean, that's just Jackalope in general. Pretty much every user interface has that bullet. And you'll see today, I'm going to flip between Kansas MEC and Minnesota MEC, and they are basically the same UI, but they definitely have some customizations in them. Scheduler counter management integration, that's part of the Kansas MEC, and I'll show you that. So the ability to go from the scheduler and press a button and then have all the counts that were scheduled for a particular, county functional class, have those pre-fill into the MEC, and then you just sit there and enter in the values, the date, and the numbers themselves. And then remote access considerations. That's something we haven't dealt with yet, but the ability to, other than just normal Jackalope, that you can get it, you can run Jackalope on a tablet, maybe it is possible. But someday, maybe in version 2, the ability to have a field person who has no internet access be able to enter in data, things like that. But that bullet kind of fell off the design thing. So if you go into data operations, underneath all of your other stuff, you'll see the manual count entry thing here. And it looks very similar to, I'm going to open, remember your advanced Jackalope training, you can open up different tabs. Data management, it looks very similar to the normal file submission that you're used to seeing here. So in fact, it's almost identical with a couple differences. So you can filter by agency and by user, and just like you can here. In the file submission, you can search by file name. In MEC, you can search by site name. So if you're looking for a particular site, you can hit search there, and it'll find the batches that have that site in it. And it's just a normal grid like any other grid. You can filter and sort by column labels. And I think I'll talk about the status a little bit later. But basically, it's just kind of like your standard Jackalope grid, and you can export it to various things. We do have this delete empty submissions button, which allows you to basically do the house cleaning step of deleting submissions that don't actually have any data associated with them. So there's ways in Jackalope to either accidentally or purposely create files or MEC submissions that do not have any data associated with them. You can then go and press the delete empty submissions button, which will remove that. And I don't remember if that's in Minnesota too, but if not, it'll be in the 103 version. So mostly from here, you'll want to create a new submission or view an existing submission. Let's just create a new submission. And you first give it a name, and we'll just do LJ test. This is the description. It's kind of like the file submission description. However you like to organize your life with regards to data getting into the system, if you've got a county, excuse me, a county or something like that, you can call it, Santa Fe County, or however you organize your life, that's how you would name this. Just looking at Bill's stuff, 2017 Graham State. Of course, that's a test. If we were to look at Minnesota, let me just log in real quickly. No, there says manual count entry too. There's some Darren, things like that. I'm going to be showing off both of your guys' systems. I hope that's okay. As well as some test things. This particular environment isn't really the official test environment anymore, but we've got some stuff going on here. So just however you like to organize your life, and that's really up to you guys, is how you can name that. So LJ test, Zoink, we're going to hit OK. The very first time you do this, you're going to get a file blocker thingy, a window pop-up blocker, excuse me, if you know what I'm talking about in this bar, because it does open up a new window. The reason we did that is so that you can have this kind of on one screen if you wanted it, and then main jackalope on another screen, and you can kind of flip between them if you needed to. So like any new, like if you open the sitemap for the first time, it'll do the same thing. Anytime it opens a new window, the very first time you're going to have to deal with the pop-up blocker message that you'll undoubtedly get. Okay, so this is the main MEC screen. I think what I'll do is, let's just start at the top. This is the name that you gave it. You can, of course, change this afterwards if you wanted to. You can also pick a collected by a field collector. And these are users in the system with the role underscore field collector role assigned to them. So you're not going to see everybody here, just those people, the people with the field collector role. So if you want to, if you're looking for a user and that user is not there, get your jackalope administrator to assign that role to them, the role underscore field collector, and then they'll show up from that point onward. And the submitted by and processing owner is just kind of hard coded. You can't change it. It's the person that, it's you and then the agency that you belong to, which I guess I belong to KDOT. Over in the next box over is the site information, which is, this box actually occurs in a few places in Jackalope. It's in the product viewer, it's in aid. I don't remember if we have an aid demo as well, but we demoed it at the users group, I believe. And I think it's in a couple other places where you just have the standalone box that gives you information. And the information that it's giving you is whatever site you were working on down here, or if you click on a site, that will reflect up here. You can change what values are here by clicking this add button and changing, if you want to see one of your road names or something like that, you can do that by clicking add and then picking whatever you want. And it shows your state specific site attributes here. So you're like an ATR city name, I think that's one of the custom fields. And there's probably sequence number is one of the road names that Kansas uses. So these are all just part of your site, and you can pick those and they will show up here. Over here is just a little keyboard shortcut help box. Pretty straightforward. The tab is how you navigate. There's a Jira out there to make enter also a navigatable keystroke. It has not been done yet, but there is a Jira to allow that. So tab will get you between fields, spacebar will select something, and kind of the part that requires some attention is the last column, how you save rows. And when we're doing it, I'll show you how to do this, but it's more than just, you can do more than just save a row. And I'll talk about the differences in a second. This active profile I'll talk about in a second. We'll go over that in a bit. And then down here is the area where you can just start entering in for your information. The first blank row, which is this, it's the row underneath all the filter thingies down there. So you can just go in and oh good, and start typing. It's like most it's like most site entry boxes where you can enter in the first couple digits and it will supply a drop-down box that you can select from. And then you can enter the date. Let's do 9/2018. Do 9/18. I'm picking a particular day because of some QC. I don't want to have it flag a QC, which I'll explain in a second. So we're going to pick 9/18, which is a Tuesday. One of the QC is the permissible start day for a count. And I'm not sure what that's set to, but I'll be safe because Tuesday is by default a permissible day. So site first, date, the field direction. These are the TMG fields. You can either hit the drop-down list, or you can type, I hit a 0 to come up with 0. So if it's two directional north south, that would be a 0. Two directional for the east west, that would be the 9. And otherwise, you can just hit 1 for north, 2, the normal TMG things. So I'm just going to hit 0. So this will be the information that we're going to enter in is going to be bidirectional. It will represent the entire roadways information. Next is the duration. And in this case, it is set as a particular set of values. So it can be 24, 48, 72. And kind of like the other one, you can just sort of hit 2 or 7 or 4. And it'll come up with the right one. You can customize MEC to, instead of showing the drop down, to actually have a text box where you type in 52 if it's a 52-hour count, and then we do the math to try to normalize that to a day for you. The collection units, this is a sort of confusing, but it's necessary for the processing of the data. So when you're collecting data, frequently you're collecting it with a single tube, right? And as I've said 1,000 times, a single tube is good for what? Collecting how many axles pass that counter. It's not good for knowing how many vehicles actually pass that counter. So in order to go from axles to vehicles, you need to tell the system how the data was actually collected. And so there's 3 possibilities here. One is that the number that you're going to enter in is the number of axles. And so if the number is 1,000, the ultimate AADT is probably going to be something less than 500, right? Because on average, there's a little bit over 2 axles per vehicle. So 1,000 axles means 450 vehicles, maybe, depending on various things. Or the number that you're entering in could be a vehicle, in which case that divide by 2 logic doesn't occur, because you're actually entering in 1,000, and that number 1,000 represents the number of vehicles. And we don't have to adjust for the number of axles per vehicle. Or there's this other one, which is called 2-axle equivalent, and that's where the counter has automatically divided by 2 for you. So in that case, you might see a number from the system and it'll say 1,000. That does not mean 1,000 vehicles, and it does not mean 1,000 axles. What it really means is 2,000 axles and the counter divided by 2 for you. So when the data comes into you, you have to know how it was taken. You have to know what that value means on the spreadsheet. So if you see a 923, you have to know, well, is that kind of like the ADT? Did they already deal with the fact that it's an axle count or something like that? If it's like an ADT, that would be a vehicle. Or if it's something else, they have to tell you basically when they give you the data. So I'll just keep it at axle, and this is the actual number. Okay, so we're just going to hit 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll show you how to customize the system so that if you get a spreadsheet from a local and that local has already done things like factor it, and so the numbers in that spreadsheet or piece of paper are actual AADTs, they've already been factored. You don't want to enter in the raw value. You want to enter in, we call it the summary value. That data's already been factored. I'll show you how to configure that in a second. But this is normally what it will look like probably. You're probably getting some unfactored value from either your own staff or from a local or an engineering firm or something like that. And you'd put the raw value there. And then you'd tab and you'd skip right over the summary value, because the summary value is going to be calculated for you. Recorder ID is not something everybody will see. Recorder ID is the counter. And this is the integration between the counter inventory system, which I'm almost positive we have another GoToMeeting for, to talk about the counter inventory system. So if you have counters, and I'm talking about actual hardware there, not the people counting, not people, but hardware here. So you can actually have an inventory of all your devices that collect data, and you can associate this particular count with that particular device. And that's for, the reason we do that is for, and this is a Kansas thing, is to correlate, data quality with the actual devices that collected that data. And in theory, over time, you could see, oh, well, this one particular device is constantly, producing low numbers because the tube goes out halfway through or something like that. And allows you just to kind of make that correlation between data quality and an actual counter. But like I said, not everybody will have this field. Like, for example, Minnesota does not have this field because they don't have that set up. So that's the counter. The next two fields are for notes. So you can create notes, and just a brief reminder, notes are ways to identify data textually. So you might say, well, this data was affected by a construction or event, or this was a special count during the big game, or something like that. So you can identify a textual attribute with that count. In addition, you can describe how you want that data to be used downstream. Normal notes have 5 or 6 different data use attributes, no ADT being one of them. No ADT meaning, okay, we're going to keep this data in the system, but we're not going to use it for any downstream processing. So we're not going to use it to calculate factors. We're not going to use it to, if you've got the RDI and you're pushing data to XOR or something like that, it won't be used for that. It'll be noted on reports. There will be an asterisk next to that value that says this data wasn't used for ADTs. So just a reminder, notes have data usage flags associated with them. No ADT being the most common for sure, but there's others. There's no factor, there's no HPMS, there's no HPMS group, which is the HPMS summary table. I think I'm missing one or two, I can't remember now, but there's other data usage flags. In MEC, we decided the only one that we're going to care about is the no ADT flag, which again is by far the most common one. So we'll just leave that blank, but in theory you could flag this and a note will be associated with it. And the text of the note will be whatever is in this field here. Okay, so what you can do at this point is we're on the last column. So this is where you save the row. The first incarnation of MEC QC'd field by field as you went through, but it was super slow, slow enough that it was awkward and cumbersome, and so we had to change the design. So now the QC aren't applied until the very end here. And so we're on the last field, and we can do any of these 4 things. So if we just hit return, which I'm going to do right now, the system goes back and it is going to save the row, hopefully. But it went and saved the row. Unfortunately, we didn't get any QC errors, so we just have a nice row of data. Either the QC aren't on for these values, or I got very lucky. So you can see one thing that happened is the summary value filled out. So the summary value is much lower than the raw value. So we entered in 1, 2, 3, 4. The summary value of 272 was created. The summary value in this case is an AADT. It's half of 1, 2, 3, 4 because remember we selected A as the collection unit. So A means axles. So automatically that 1, 2, 3, 4 would be chopped into 600 or something based on the axle factoring. But also because of, I guess it's in September, which probably has more traffic at this site, it was also factored down. Oh, and I'm sorry, it also was divided into again because of duration. So this is a 48-hour count. So without any other factoring, that 1, 2, 3, 4 goes down to 6 something. and then it gets divided into again because of the 48, so it goes down to 3 something. So this is actually a not too seasonally adjusted value. That 272 isn't far from just the straight math of dividing a couple times from that value. Another thing you can do, let's talk about the things that you can do on this last column here. So let's pretend we just entered all this data again, and I'm sitting here at the last column. If you just hit tab, it saves the current row, so it's going to go through the whole QC process again on this row, as if we just entered it. And then it's going to create a new row, a new blank row, excuse me, underneath it. This is the use case where you have a piece of paper in front of you. You just entered in the first row, and now you can start typing in the next row. Okay, which I'm not going to do. The other thing you can do is, actually I will do this. Let's go ahead and enter a new row. I'm going to do the same date. 9/18/2018. I need to remember that. We're going to do the northbound. So let's do a row where we've got it's bidirectional. So you've got 2 rows for one side, one corresponding to the northbound and one corresponding to the southbound. And let's just say 24 hours. Let's just say axle. Let's say 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm not going to do the recorder ID. And then what you can do here, instead of hitting return to save this row, up here, do you see where it says arrow down? This copies the row that you're doing and then changes the direction. So instead of being north, it will say south. So I hit the down arrow. That's weird that it's faster. And then it saved this row and performed the QC. And again, either we got lucky or not a lot of QCs turned on. And then it copied all the attributes from this row, except for the actual data, the raw value. I think I should have entered the recorder ID. I don't believe it'll copy the recorder ID either, the assumption being that each side has its own counter. It does copy the collection units, I'm pretty sure, the duration, and then it just flipped. So north was the first row, now south is the second row. So let's just go ahead and enter 54 or 1, 2, 4. 3, 4. Tab. We hit return, and then it's for some reason all of a sudden behaving faster. All right, any questions? So this is how you'd enter in a split count, basically, where you had 2 counters, 2 pieces, two numbers on your spreadsheet, and you wanted to enter them both in. I'm going to just move the screen down for a second, and I'm going to refresh this list so that our thingy shows up. Okay, so there's the batch name that I entered in when we did this. So what I did is I flipped back to the listing of all the batches for MEC, and then I changed the user to be all, and then I went to mine. And I just wanted to note this status here, which says incomplete. This is just sort of a housekeeping flag. Until you hit this button over here, the submit batch, that will say incomplete. Once you've hit submit batch and you've resolved all the errors, it will say complete once you've hit submit batch and there aren't any errors in the thing. So does that make sense? So currently incomplete. As soon as I hit submit batch, which I'll do right now, it says the manual account entry status set to complete. And then if we go back over here and refresh, it says complete now. Okay. Oh, it also closes. That's something new, relatively new. If you hit submit batch, it closes the window now. So let's just double click and we can get back into the batch that we just created. There's a flag also, and I'm going to try to remember what this does, and Bill, I might need your help. There's a flag called apply KDOT cleanup on submit rules. Oh, I remember what this is for. Okay. So if we hit submit batch, actually what really happened here, because this option was selected, what happened is it went through and it deleted any row that did not have data in it. And the reason for this is part of the business process that KDOT does is they load this from the scheduler. So I'll show you that in a second, but the idea being there will probably be holes in the data. So they'll hit this load site from scheduler button. They'll get 20 rows in here of data that should have been collected, but not all of it might have been collected, or maybe it was done directionally and not roadway, or roadway and not directionally. Anyway, there's a good chance that there will be not all of these rows will be filled out. So when you have the apply KDOT cleanup on submit rules checked, it will go through and remove those rows. We didn't have any examples of that. All of our rows had been filled out, but I can show you that in a bit. All right. So let me go through these blue buttons down here. You can schedule sites for recounts here. You can select a bunch of sites and hit the recount selected sites. And if you've got the scheduler installed, that status column will change to recount requested if you select them here and hit this recount selected sites. You can view counts in AID. I'm almost positive I went over AID in at the users group. So if you say view counts in AID, it'll take each count here, and notice we have 3 rows here, but these 2 rows are split counts, so they're actually 1 count, even though there's 2 rows. And then you see the 2 sites here representing each of those. And you can look at the data here for those. You can see the data that we entered in is the only data for this site. So I picked some sites that don't get a lot of representation. This one's better. Okay, so that's the view counts in AID. The AID is the ADT decision environment, and again, we have a recorded video demoing that Laura can give you something on. If for some reason the factors changed out from underneath these values, so let's say you go and you do all this and you discovered, oh wow, this summary value is way off, and then you go and look at the factors and you realize, oh, my factors are totally screwed up, or maybe this site belonged to the wrong factor group, or any combination of things that can affect the calculation of summary statistics. You can select that and then hit recalculate selected summary stats, and it'll go through and recalculate these, 272, 439s, using the new information, so the new factor group association, the new factors themselves. You can purge rows, which allows you just to remove it from the list, basically, and then unpurge them later. So if we're going to go ahead and purge it, it turns black. And you can show purged rows by clicking and unclicking this button here. And then you can unpurge the selected rows by hitting the unpurge button. The load sites from map currently is not implemented, but we have a JIRA to implement it. It allows you to go to the site map and draw a circle around a group of sites, and then hit this button, and then all of those sites will show up as rows here. So it's just kind of an easier way. If you have someone doing a count along a corridor, you could select all those sites using the map, hit the load sites from sitemap, and then all of a sudden those sites will all show up here in the UI for you to enter in if you wanted to. Load sites from scheduler is something that right now is pretty Kansas specific, but it's something that we can do for you all. I'll just do it here, I think, maybe. So when you hit if we were to do a demo of Kansas's scheduler, you would see these values. These are how Kansas organizes their count schedule for the year. So, you pick a year, they pick a county, and then they pick a system. And a system is sort of like functional class, although not exactly, but sort of. And those three attributes then generate a list of sites to be counted, and they pass that field sheet off to a field collector, and that field collector does their thing, fills out the field sheet with the actual values, so 200, 300, whatever, on the actual piece of paper that gets sent to the field collector. And so then when that paper comes back to KDOT, after it's been selected, they come in here and they reproduce the variables that generated that field sheet. So they'll say, okay, it was 2017, it was County Harvey, it was System 01. And then they hit this Start Import button. And then what this does is it basically mimics the field sheet. So ignore these first two, which are the ones that we created earlier. But so each of these sites, 33076 on down, were all part of that field collector's job. So there were, 8 different lines on that sheet that they had to generate numbers for, and then it's much easier for the user. Bill or whoever does it can come in here and type in the dates. I don't know why I can't remember 2018 should be easy. 2018, and then can go through and enter all that information. You'll notice when these first came up that they're red. That's because of this error message here, critical, unable to evaluate site, blah, 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 because of invalid missing begin date. Remember, unlike in Tratus, in order for a Jackalope site to be valid, it has to be anchored in time, because a site can change over time. So a site incarnation on September 18th, 2018 might be different from a site incarnation on September 18, 2017, because something about that site might have changed. So a site really isn't valid in Jackalope unless it's anchored somehow in time, whether that's by being associated with a piece of data, and of course data has time, or in this case, in MEC, you actually have to type in a date. And so if we were to go through and enter in our stuff and hit return, that red mark goes away, because now this is truly a valid site because it has a date associated with it. So when you first do the import from scheduler, it looks a little scary. Everything looks red. That's because the count date hasn't been entered in yet, basically. And a date is required as part of the MEC here. Okay. So that's the load sites from scheduler button. Mostly useful for Kansas, but if we implement the scheduler for you all and you have something similar and you say, oh, it'd be really cool if we could just, basically reproduce the field sheet in here so that I don't have to type it, we can totally do that. Okay, the last functional button is the import from CSV, and this allows you to take a spreadsheet that you get from a local and then save it as a CSV and then import it directly. So the import from CSV allows you to, is there any chance I have a CSV? Okay, we're going to create, let's pretend that UTM value. We're just going to have, oh, there's no chance I'm going to cite right. Let's pretend you have this this file. It'll be, so it just has 3 columns: site, date, value. Okay. In a place I can't actually. We're running out of time, so just trust me. You can take a CSV. So basically, you would enter in. I'm just going to pick this ELRS CSV. I have no idea what it is. Except it's huge. agileassets.csv. It's slightly smaller. So we're going to enter in agileassets.csv and pretend this is data file. So, well, that's nice. So basically, all of the column headers, which apparently look like an SQL statement here, will show up here. So normally, like in my example over here, I had site, date, value as my column headers of the CSV. If you did this, it would say site, date, value. And so you'd pick the site column for the site, you'd pick the begin date for the date, and you'd pick for the raw value, you'd pick value. And then the other ones would default to something. And I'll show you what that something is. And then you'd hit start import, and it would grab all those rows from from your spreadsheet, from your CSV. And it would do just like it did with the load sites from scheduler. It would populate those rows with as much information as it could from the fields that you selected in that last screen and pop them in here. One of the most complicated things, and this would require pretty much its own separate training session if we were to implement this for you and help you out with it. This whole interface is controlled through this profile, and roles can have their own profile associations. Okay, so let's just look at this. So this is a better example. I just switched to Minnesota real quickly. And so they have a field collector profile, they have a raw value MnDOT profile, and then they have something else for field collectors. This field collector is for MnDOT employees, I guess, and this field collector is for non-MnDOT employees. And each of these can have different parameters that control how the user experience goes here. So again, there's no chance that I have the time to go through all of these options, but just to give you a general sense, there's general options of how the user interface will work. One of the most important options is here, which is what values the user has to enter. So the one it is now is the one that we were looking at in Kansas, where we're going to calculate summary statistics from a raw value that's entered. So the user will enter a raw value, they'll press return at the end, and then a summary value will be created. It's also possible that only a raw could be put in there, or only a summary. So in the case where you've got a spreadsheet full of AADTs, where you don't want to calculate anything, you'd want to create a profile that had this value checked, so that you would just be entering in AADTs. And then I guess you could have a situation where you want to enter in both raw and summary values. There's some QC options at the general level, but then each field has a set of QC options. Okay, so that QC I kept trying to work around, which is what is a permissible start day of week. That's set to Monday through Friday here. But you could say I want all my short-term counts to start within these days, and that allows you to track fumble-fingeredness. If someone actually accidentally types in a weekend, someone going out and collecting on a Saturday, that's probably not something that happens all the time, so you could check that here. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but every field that you saw in the MEC has a set of QC associated with it. You can also control what buttons a profile sees. So I'm in this raw MnDOT one here, and they can see everything. But when I first came in, I wasn't able to see everything. I think it was this one. Yeah. So the only thing a field collector MnDOT can do is see the delete select accounts button. And then you can add and remove profiles in this screen. And that's the MEC in a nutshell. I guess this is not intended to be a training session, by the way. This is just an overview of what you can do. This would have to be followed up if you're interested in implementing this with a more in-depth training session, especially at the administrator level, if you're going to be messing around with these roles and trying to really customize your MEC experience. That does require a bit more in-depth training for sure. Of course, if you want some more, if this is something you plan on implementing in your state, coordinate with Kathy. There's a little bit of setup that has to occur. We have to create default profiles and a few other things. There's just a bit of work we have to do, and then you're pretty much free to go crazy with it.